You are listening to the Therapists in the Hot Seat podcast with your hosts, Tom Coates and Tom Holland Pierce.
Hello and welcome to the Therapists in the Hot Seat podcast. We're the podcast where we try and demystify all things mental health and therapy, whilst also trying to have a little bit of fun along the way. My name is Tom Coates, and as always, I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Tom Holland Pierce. Would you like to say hi, Tom?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thank you very much. And for anybody watching, you'll have seen that we're also joined by Ron Yap, who's joining us again for a second episode. Welcome back, Ron. Would you like to say hi?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, you're very, very, very welcome. Thank you so much for your time and for coming on. And we'll do a proper introduction for Ron in a moment. But before we do, thank you so much, everybody, for coming along and listening to our episode. Please do remember, if you wish, to subscribe to our YouTube channels and follow us on our socials, our Instagram. You could also visit our website if you wanted, and you could even buy us a coffee, which would be very, very nice. But of course, don't feel like you have to. Today is a pretty challenging topic, I would say. We're unpacking something that often hides in plain sight. Many people don't really want to die, but at the same time feel that life is really quite challenging. And therefore they might struggle with something called passive suicidality, or they might be living with something that we call passive suicidality. So we're going to explore this through the lens of our mental health experience and through therapy with Ron and Ron's expertise. And I just want to say it's a difficult topic. So if at any point you're feeling triggered or that this is too much, please feel free to turn us off. And please do not feel like you have to sit through it. Yeah. This is also not a substitute for professional help. So if you do need any support, then please do think about accessing anything local to you. And we'll also include some UK-based helplines in our show notes as well. Okay, so Tom, I'll hand over to you, if that's okay, to introduce Ron properly.
Yeah, so this is Ron. We've had him in our previous series before. We were talking about loneliness on that episode, and it was a really, really powerful one. This one, they just introduced Ron before I go off on a ramble. Ron is a psychotherapist, and he's a mental health advocate, and he's founder of the Instagram page at Mental Health CEO, and he has over 340,000 followers as well. So it's a real achievement there. He's a provisional member of the Singapore Association of Counselling, and he's earned his master's in 2024, and he has lived experience of loneliness, OCD, and what we're talking about today, passive suicidality. So, Ron, I thought we'd start off with a massive question, if that's okay for you. I just wanted to understand, what is passive suicidality, and maybe how does that compare to something like active suicidality?
Totally. And I think when people think of the word suicidality or like suicidal, they mostly think of active suicidality, which is people having that intention of death, of like suicide, and they have like plans listed out with like the exact time and date and where I'm going to do it and how I'm going to do it. But the truth is, when you look at the research into suicidology, that active suicidality forms relatively small part of the overall population of people who are suicidal. And it is like what Tom said, people who maybe don't exactly have a active intention of dying, but it's almost always on their minds. And like basically passive suicidality is defined as having a acceptance of, and even sometimes a desire for death, but not being able to realize it themselves. To not having that active element of suicidality. But as a result of that, of not being urgently in need of care, a lot of times they are seen as invisible. A lot of times they are neglected and ignored because by both professionals and hotlines and even the people around them, because they don't have this active element. But the truth is they form a majority of the suicidal population. So that's how that goes.
So is there kind of like a lack of weight when we consider them? They're not as weighty, let's say, as someone who's actively suicidal. Is that kind of what we're saying there?
100%. And I think it gets to a point where people often minimize their own suicidality. They minimize their own pain because they think, oh, like there's no urgency for me because I'm not going to die anytime soon. And because of this, they either minimize their own pain, or sometimes they don't even report it at all, when like it is like there's millions of people in the state right now.
It's really sad. Sorry, Tom, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, sorry, Tom, to come in. What's the impact of that then, Ron? If people are kind of almost invalidating their own feelings, what does that lead to for somebody?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind was shame. And yeah, I think there's this idea of like both shame and guilt, because in almost all cultures, there's this idea of life is precious, life is a gift. And this is, considering the fact that most societies have a history of religion as well, who have this kind of message that life is a gift, that you shouldn't just throw your life away. But just the idea that people are thinking of suicide, people are thinking of like giving this gift away through their own hands, it produces this element of shame that prevents them from actively reaching out to people. And this is compounded because, like I said, we mostly think of suicide in the active way. And these are people that are, they have suicide notes, they're in the ER, they are telling people about it. But this element of invisibility, that my concerns aren't worth help or attention because there is no active plan, it's something that so many people face that creates so much shame and guilt. And there's this other element of like, because it's passive, right? I'm so weak that I can't even do it myself. And that is
Wow.
also another layer of shame and guilt.
Yeah.
That ironically, sometimes it keeps people from completing the act, but it's still a source of shame nonetheless.
There's a few different sides to this, isn't there? There's a side of that, I'm feeling that I'm not worthy of support because it's not at that point where I'm actually going to act upon it, but also from services perhaps not offering of that support so immediately, and therefore from both angles, my needs are being suppressed. I'm really being overlooked, and for me, it's just highlighting the importance of a therapist being aware of that and sort of saying, "Oh my gosh, no, this is so serious and so important that we must, engage these people, because there could be, a restriction in people coming forward. But if people are then coming forward and they're being dismissed, that's going to really impact their experience and their desire to want to continue."
Yeah, exactly. And then,
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say the word that keeps coming to my head is legitimized. And I could just almost feel that if you are passive and not active in your suicidality, there would be like a perceived sense that my struggles aren't legitimate or as important. And I think what you were just saying there, Tom, and that if you go to a mental health professional and you don't receive that necessary support, it could what's the word I'm looking for here?
Yes.
Like,
Spiral or like,
yeah, spiral
yeah.
it, affirm that as well. And I could imagine those people are feeling, well, I don't know, forgotten,
discarded, like
discounted.
there was secondary priority, like a lower priority, like
Yeah.
invisible. Yeah, and I think this is a common thing that's occurring, and I think the a big part of it is that because there are so many people like on wait lists and they're calling hotlines and stuff, there are a lot of suicidal people, both passive and active, who have yeah, we keep like referring them to these sources of care, which is definitely a good thing. But oftentimes the care that they receive, because they are of a lower priority, makes them feel like their case number, like 1,574 or whichever it is. And this makes them feel like less of a person because they don't have an active risk to their lives. And this, like, it's layer upon layer of guilt and shame and guilt and shame that passively suicidal people are feeling.
Is suicide, either active or passive, always related to things like depression, would you say?
That's a good question. And I think from my background as a practitioner of ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, which is it's a transdiagnostic kind of modality, the idea that it is definitely there's definitely like a very solidly researched link between mental health conditions like depression and especially BPD, the borderline personality disorder, to suicide. But sometimes there's a bit, my personal opinion is that there's a bit too much focus on the pathology aspect. And in doing so, we often ignore the fact that there are many cases, like I would even say the majority of cases, of people who don't have any mental health condition on the surface, but they are suicidal because of one because mainly their pain is the scale of their pain is too much. And sometimes when in going through the report, you have depression, you have BPD. When people say no, people often assume that the risk of suicide is lower because they don't have a condition. But the truth is, the majority of people, they either go undiagnosed, or sometimes it's because of a certain life event or a certain period of pain that causes them to think about suicide in the first place. And yet they don't fit that criteria for in the DSM-5, for example.
It's very interesting. I love that use of the word pathologize, because you are right. I mean, this is a massive generalization, but in my career, me and Tom have had relatively similar careers, but I've always sort of been trained on it as sort of something to fix. Like a ship is sinking and you've got to patch up the holes quickly, and that's lots of different ways you can do that, in using different services or creating a risk management plan and so forth.
Yeah. Like
but sometimes it's something that isn't there to. It's maybe not always there something to be fixed. It's not a pathology per se. It's just like an experience of that particular moment in time.
Yeah, totally. And I think there was a part because in my own research, right? There's it's funny, I have it right beside me. This is a really influential book. It's called "Why People Die by Suicide" by Thomas Joyner, who is a eminent professor of suicidality, which I didn't even know was a field of psychology until I researched into it. But I think there's a lot of gems in this book. But one of the things that he was saying was that if we hypothetically, if we had a button that we could just press and we would just like vanish, like almost like virtually everyone would press it. And the point that he was trying to make was that like this idea of suicide, we think of it as, like isolated to people with major mental health conditions or unimaginable pain. But the truth is that the idea of thinking about suicide or wanting to end your pain is a perfectly logical and natural form of thinking when an individual is put into a situation where they are facing pain that is intolerable, pain that is unimaginable. And I think that's a very key part of reducing the stigma behind suicide, even if it's passive or active. This idea that when we are in a situation of a similar magnitude of pain, that we would inevitably and naturally think of ending our pain in one way or another. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And something that, of course, I think when we're training new therapists, we're thinking, okay, we should definitely be asking these questions. We should definitely be exploring this, because
100%.
This is a logical thing, right? One of, in my array of problem solving, this is one of my ways of getting away from this pain. So it's not abnormal that those thoughts have popped into our minds. We're not different or weird. It's actually very legitimate. It doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen, but it's one of our options. And I work with many people who will never say it's off the cards. They'll say it's always there as a possibility, as an escape. That doesn't mean I'm going to do it. And that's where kind of as therapists, we have to think about, how okay am I sitting with this? And maybe like what Tom was saying, do I need to patch this up? Do I need to fix this? Or instead, do I accept that this is a part of their experience and the way they see their world and as a possible exit, and that's okay, because for now it's not an immediate concern.
I suppose you could argue it's on everyone's cards. It's essentially on everyone's cards. It doesn't mean it's at all probable or likely or anything like that, but it's essentially there. And maybe we need to kind of accept that as just part of the human experience, rather than, as clinicians, panicking. I've certainly panicked many times in my career over things like that, and actually just accepting it and bringing it into the discussion safely.
Yeah, and sometimes when you get it off people's chest, they feel like this huge sense of relief.
I can imagine that.
Yeah, how will my therapist like treat me? Are they gonna like call the police on me? Are they gonna like immediately dispatch like the emergency services?
Yeah.
But with a therapist that can handle that and sit with it, it's like, like this is normal. And I think one of my major kind of thesis is that that suicide itself is not so much a pathological behavior. It's definitely linked to pathology, but it is more so a way to solve problems.
Okay.
It is a problem-solving outlook. Yeah, Tom?
Sorry. And the problem that they would be trying to solve is avoidance of pain. Is that kind of the main
Yes.
one? Is there other
Yes.
fact? We can probably explore this a bit later, but that is one of the main problems. That would be
Yeah.
essentially, if you could push that magic button, essentially that is one of your options, a solution.
Definitely, it's avoidance of pain, and it's ending a pain, right? And it's also linked to this idea that, one day I can wake up and all my pain will disappear, or one day I can wake up and basically my life will be changed in a very massive way. And one of the interesting findings in the book I just showed to you was that the people who had a tendency to believe in this kind of, like, they call it heroic change in all aspects of their life, not just suicide, were more likely to have suicidal tendencies because they were more likely to believe that one day I can just wake up and my life will be completely different. And suicide is kind of like within that umbrella.
Yeah. I have so many clients who say, look, Tom, I'm not going to kill myself. I can't see myself dying. But if you could just, if I could just get in the car and drive and not come back and start a new life, then that would be ideal. But there are often anchors to people's lives that stop that happening, and that can be very frustrating sometimes for people. But it's not necessarily about death; it's about getting away and just being away from all of this.
Something that I do think is a bit of a controversial point, but a lot of people say, like, there's this phrase, right, that suicidal people don't want to die, but they just want their pain to end. My counterpoint to that is, and this is like, I've seen comments and like talk to people and talk to clients with, there are many people who do want to die. Yeah. And it's something that's hard for people to accept, this like desire for death. But when we phrase it in that problem solving like manner, I think it makes more sense for people. But yeah, just
to highlight the urgency of it, you mean?
Totally.
Yeah.
Would
there be kind of a question about if there's a difference, you've got actively suicidal people, some want to end their pain and some just and want to die. Why do you think that people that would want to die wouldn't want to simply end their pain? Is that too hypothetical?
That's a good question, and I think the first thing that I thought of was that, like, there are some people who want to use like their own death as a way to maybe get back at the people who hurt them.
Yes, I see.
Yeah, as like a revenge or like vengeance kind of thing.
Interesting.
So, yeah, for those people, their death is kind of like a tool, like it's like a goal on their path to like to exacting this kind of justice or vengeance.
That's very interesting. That.
Yeah, and then we can't say that, oh, you don't want to die, but for these people, they are like, yeah, I do want to die, and it's for this kind of understandable reason. And then we are coming in and we're saying that is it the best way to go about this path? And oftentimes, most of the time, the answer is like, yeah, it's usually a better way of doing things, and that's why we say that. Yeah,
so it almost feels like a communication. Like, look what has happened. Look what you've pushed me to. Look at where I am because of all of this. Whether I've not been listened to or the way I've been treated. For some people, it's a tool.
Definitely. And and this kind of thinking is so common in young people, and it's partly the reason why the suicide rates are on the rise for youth.
It's so interesting to have that critical discussion over what suicide means for the individual. There's lots of different explanations for why they'd want to be suicidal or dead, or to not have pain, or to exact justice, or to communicate how they felt about X. And I think that is such a rich tapestry of information.
Definitely.
And I think, you said when people just speak about their suicidality to you, it can feel like a weight off them. I'd also add on to that, and I bet them learning, their own minds a bit better and their reasons behind their feelings and potential actions also could help with that burden, because they can think, oh, maybe if I just want to get back at that person, as we said earlier, faulty problem solving, maybe there's a better way. Maybe 100%. I don't have to end my life. Maybe I can find a more effective manner to carry out that particular thing.
Yeah. And like, because the reason for that is, like, let's say your goal is indeed to get back at somebody that maybe hurt you in the past, or like bullies or oppressors or that kind of thing, that you have this one path of ending your life. But the issue with that is that once you do that, you can't do it further. You can only do it once. And as a result of that, like, could it also be a case where, for example, you live, instead of trading your life for this goal, you live your life to such an extent, you live such a good life that that serves as a form of like vengeance or justice in itself. That no matter what you did to try and hurt me, I'm still living my life to the fullest. And that's another
Defiance.
form. Yeah. That defiance, that rebellion, that positive rebellion. That's one way of thinking about it. And we have take this kind of problem-solving approach and we can apply it to almost all cases of suicide, to realize that there is very frequently a better path than ending your life. Even though it's perfectly fine to keep it as a lower quality option in your pocket. And sometimes that's what keeps people alive. This idea that at any time I can use this option, but in the meantime, I have others that I can resort to.
Yeah. It's kind of reminding me of problem solving in core CBT, right? When we get people to solve problems, we ask people to come up with every which way you could solve it. So if I can't pay my car payment, for example, what's one option is to ask for money. What's another option is to rob a bank, right? One of those options seems silly, but it's still an option. And I'm not saying suicide is silly, but they all come with different threats and outcomes and consequences. Just like robbing a bank throws me into prison, for a long time, and I don't end up with my money. So you've just reminded me as well of that very famous saying that suicide is a long-term solution for a potentially short-term problem as well. So the idea that I could keep it in my back pocket, we don't have to say, oh, it's taboo, we shouldn't talk about it, but maybe it's a lower quality, as you propose, Ron, option than something else, which might actually be a bit more helpful. Definitely. The one thing that you got me thinking about there while you were talking is self-harm as a communication. And, and that is something, of course, that can communicate the impact on me. It can, and we see different forms of self-harm, don't we? We see sometimes very visible self-harm where it feels like it's a communication and look at this, look what I'm doing because of what's happening to me and I'm not being taken seriously or because of what you're doing. But then the more covert self-harm, the kind of stuff that happens in the parts of the body we don't see, behind closed doors and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering, almost with the same differentiation between passive or active suicidality, could there be a passive or active form of self-harm?
100%. And I was really about that. I think you read my mind on that when you asked that question.
I did. That's my new skill. Remind me.
Yeah. So you're putting a new standard for therapists that I don't think I can beat. But because I was going to say that a very big, in fact, I would even say like a core characteristic or symptom of passive suicidality is that because they can't do it themselves with their own hands, they're kind of taking that autonomy and they're giving it to everything else, be it like a passing truck on the road or being reckless in high places. Or it just, for example, it could even be, let's say if the weather is cold, it's wearing lesser clothing to kind of, and I there's a name for this, it's called diminished self-preservation. In the sense that it's not so much deliberate self-harm, but it's this idea of like, oh, if I can't do it myself, I'm going to give it to something else. It could be God, it could be nature, it could be anything else apart from my own hands. And some people, because there's they deliberately breathe in like car smoke, they are reckless on the road, and and that's why addiction, reckless use of substances, is so tied to suicidality. And it's under the interpersonal theory of suicide by Thomas Joyner. There's this thing, the thing that actually translates passive suicidality into active is this thing called acquired capability, which is the idea that life is so the innate self-preservation instincts in human being can be overcome, and this is done through either previous suicide attempts or incidences of violence towards others as a victim of violence or towards yourself. And within this, it is self-harm is considered one of these behaviors.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, Tom, but there's been times in my life where I've worked for certain, places where I've thought, gosh, if I just stick my leg out here in front of this bus, it would just really snap my leg. And that would mean I don't have to work for like a while and I'd be on sick pay. Those kind of, I know it's, a little bit different to ending my life, but this idea that this could be taken out of my hands, almost like suicide by cop. in that
Yeah.
if I wave an unloaded weapon at a police officer, maybe they'll shoot me.
Yeah. And
Sorry, sorry, I was going to say something. I had a question. So one of my questions, although you did answer it, was why would people who experience suicidality like this give it to something or someone else to do? I think you answered it. You said acquired. What was that word you used? Sorry.
capability.
Acquired capability.
Yeah.
And sorry, just to go through that with me, my brain is a bit slow today. I'm operating on suboptimal sleep.
Same.
Okay. So what does that mean? Sorry, like the learned ability that you could do something to yourself of that
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is something to do that with like the fragility of life, where because every human being, they're usually born with this idea of like self-preservation. It's one of our most basal instincts to keep ourselves safe. But through repeated life incidents, which usually have a form of harm embedded in them, many incidents, or just sometimes even like thinking about them for a long time, can wear down that instinct to keep yourself safe.
Interesting.
And yeah, it usually involves some form of harm, be it trauma, complex trauma, incidences of violence, and being exposed to crime, either as a perpetrator or as the victim. It's these kind of incidents that convince you that, hey, actually, your life is fragile, and that through your own hands you can actually like take it away.
I
Yeah,
suppose
so
that's
that's
why
one
you
thing.
see certain populations. I mean, in England at least, we're always mindful of farmers, for example, because they've got
Interesting.
access to means, e.g., they may have a shotgun or some heavy
Mm.
machinery, and they're skilled, and they're practiced.
Definitely.
Same with our, armed forces. They obviously know
You
what to
had
do.
you had an episode on veteran mental health, right? I was seeing.
We did, yeah, we did. I don't think we spoke too much about suicidality. It
We
wasn't quite
didn't.
on that front. I suppose it would have been a whole other. It would have been too much for that episode, I think. But
Mm.
it is, we really have to do. We do need to think about that. The people with
Yeah.
frankly, the ability and the knowledge and the strength and, dare I say, courage. To be able to commit that, to override their basic survival instinct.
Definitely.
That's,
And
that acquired. I've forgotten the word again, but the acquired.
capability.
Sorry.
No worries. I'll just chime in too, but I think Tom wants to say something. But that's don't want to bring any like gender stereotypes, but that is part of the reason why men have a much higher suicide rate, completed suicide rate than women. In fact, like it's usually around 2 to 3 times more in all parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I was just thinking, actually, I was reflecting as you were talking about, and typical, my mind's going to go blank now, isn't it? What was I
Gina, can I just interrupt you? So I live it. This whole podcast recording is exact. I'm like, say that question, and then there's a pause. I'm like, oh, I've forgotten the damn question.
Yeah.
You're not
And
on
I
your own.
appreciate you just taking the time to give me a pause for it to come back, but it didn't come back.
No.
No, it's come back to me now. So I was thinking what you said about addiction, Ron, and our knowledge that these things that we use are often poisonous. Alcohol, cigarette smoke, heroin, other substances are available. But it's that idea that people in their wise self know what they're doing is damaging, and yet the impact it gives them, probably because of, like you said, the traumas, the pains and everything, it kind of overrides that self-preservation and say, I know this is probably going to damage my liver. I know this is probably going to damage my heart, and yet I'm still going to use this.
Yeah. And that's also, there's a part there that's usually, it's also along the lines of like, I'm not going to live long enough anyway to experience the effects of that. So I might as well like enjoy my life in the present.
Wow.
And that's why they go down this path. And it's again this like very like short-term thing where another big part of it is like a lot of suicidal people, they a big characteristic is that they can't see in the future. They can't like have this like long-term visualization ability because they've been so stuck in survival mode for like probably decades at this point. And as a result of that, just to tap in like to the management part of the conversation, like a big part is actually helping them to realize, what does a happy life look like for you? If you did have, the time and energy to care for something, to live a meaningful and fulfilling life, what does it look like? And most of the time they'll say, I don't know. But that's where we come in as therapists to kind of break that down and identify their values and the baby steps towards that path.
Yeah. You've read my mind there, Ron. I was just thinking about values as well. And, really, if we wanted to, within reason, we could change our lives in so many different ways, couldn't we? And if I really, really tried to convince my wife, I'm sure we could probably move to Scotland and live on the coast and live in a, castle-esque building
Sounds
and do
incredible.
that
I
would
would
be
love that.
love
Please.
for that. I don't do that. I look out at kind of a concrete jungle out here and nowhere near the coast and that kind of thing. But if really that was the case, then this could be cultivated. Like I was, I'm really sorry if you're listening, mate, but I got a tattoo last week, and there was a gentleman who was just talking about how he can feel very anchored, and actually when he sits back and reflects on it, there are so many opportunities to do things. Like you can pop over to the continent, you can get a short break here, you can go and visit that friend in Bali, you can go do these other things, and that life doesn't have to be as restricted as it sometimes feels with a bit of thought and planning and preparation.
Yeah, and sorry, Tom, you want to say something?
No, it's okay. I'm mulling over my questions if you have an immediate answer.
Is this an observation? It's something interesting that I read in the research. Like, if I had to ask you a question, and we're all kind of in agreement that external factors like the macro factors can influence suicide rates, like poverty, like cultural trauma, can definitely increase suicide rates. But if I were to ask you, let's say in times of war and political instability, do you think that suicide rates increase or decrease?
Decrease.
I want to, my mind immediately says increase because of what people might be exposed to, but then my logical self says decrease because my whole world is falling apart and crumbling and change is coming.
Yeah.
I
think
don't know.
people
What's the answer,
would
Ron?
come together a little bit.
Yeah. Actually, the I'm sure like there's different studies that suggest different things, but the consensus is that being in a state of war actually decreases suicide rates, and that's because the usual internal like microsystemic factors are like deprioritized compared to the survival of the individual. And when you have this change in priority, like suicide just kind of leaves your mind because your bigger problem solved now is to survive.
So it's kind of a weird sort of irony there, isn't it? To the threat of death now makes me suddenly sit up and take this a bit more, not seriously, but reprioritize.
Do you think we saw something on maybe a macro level? I haven't looked at the stats. You might know better than me, Ron, but during our lockdowns, because I definitely felt a lift of togetherness and survival and people taking steps to keep everybody else safe. And I know it wasn't war, but it kind of was war on COVID, right? So I suppose it's just that I wonder if we saw anything like that here then.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is definitely like a true phenomenon, like this banding together. But I think the other side of that equation was that there are some people who don't have that inclination, and as a result, they kind of withdraw into themselves. And I believe that definitely have to look this up, but the rates did increase during COVID because of loneliness, because of isolation.
Yeah, because of the isolation.
Yeah. But I guess one silver lining of it was that mental health was definitely brought into the awareness. Yeah, the other big thing I think was a big problem was that I think during the lockdown period, you're kind of forced to live like either by yourself or with family that you may not want to live with. And that can lead to a lot of deterioration as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question, if I may. If we kind of separated out the population into smaller groups and say we just had our actively suicidal and our passively, say you could just delineate that really clearly, I'm sure it wouldn't really work at that. What's the difference? Why are some people active and why are some people passive? And because I would assume passive is where we want to sort of get that person if we can. What do they have that the active people don't have, do you think?
It's a bit that we touched on, but I think it's like in the previous section, but I think it's beneficial to just lay it out. It is the bravery or the courage or the will, the motivation to be able to end life and to be able to end their own life. Yeah. And in other words, this is the acquired capability that we were talking about. So to kind of lay out the theory in its entirety, the two parts that the interpersonal theory of suicide, the two things that lead to suicidal ideation is a thwarted belongingness, which is it is loneliness, but it's also this idea of I've tried so hard to fit in, I've tried many times to fit in and to belong, but I keep failing. And the other thing is perceived burdensomeness.
Mhm.
Yeah, the idea that I'm a burden to the people around me. So having these two things creates a desire for death and suicidal ideation. But what translates that into active is, like I said, the presence of acquired capability.
I see. And is that
Yeah.
the main predictive factor between active and passive is the acquired capability? Both are experiencing the thwarted blogging-ness and perceived burdensomeness, but
Definitely.
it's just because I suppose what my train of thought was is there other anchors a person has, like almost like positive ones, not just the acquired ability? Is there like reasons do you find like protective factors or families or things that tend to just keep people
Okay.
on the right side there?
Yeah. So the answer is yes, and I think I was trying to like tiptoe around it, but like in my book, which is called Passive Suicidality.
Here we go. Should I hold it up?
Yeah. So one of the thank you. Yeah. So this is the proof copies, which is why you see the not for resale one. But yeah.
Yes.
And also I really like the cover design. It's a side note.
Yeah, it's really
like
smart. It's like the sea.
Yeah, so it's like the border between life and death kind of thing. Just
Interesting.
what else I was
Oh,
kind of going for.
deep. Available in all good bookstores this week, guys. We'll revisit it at the end of our session, but Ron just couldn't keep it in. He just had to.
Yeah, I could not. Yeah, it's always been like,
Really
in this
joking,
chapter, in this chapter. Yeah, so I had one chapter specifically to talk about passive suicidality, and a big part of that is talking about the reasons why people stay alive. And like there's a wide variety, but the common ones include there's a group of reasons to do with their loved ones. And this is one on guilt, which is the pain that their loved ones would feel if they were to go. And the other reason is duty, the duty to care for the dependents, which is either a sibling or a child or very commonly a pet. Yeah. So this is to do with their loved ones. Other ones are more along the lines of like fear, be it the fear of the afterlife or more commonly the fear of death. Because virtually all methods of suicide are either painful or scary or really they leave like a mess. And it's these kind of like reasons that keep people like hanging on. And the other big ones is just you've probably, I don't know if you heard of this book called I Want to Die, but I Want to Eat Tteokbokki. It's a Korean book.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've heard of it before.
I'm reading your book.
Yeah. So, but the title is very evocative, which is that I want to die, but there's these really small reasons, be it like food or coffee or like, just maybe like my favorite TV series hasn't ended, and or my money hasn't run out yet, so I can still like enjoy life. And it's these reasons that kind of keep people hanging on. And the other one is like we said, just having this idea of suicide in your back pocket that keeps people alive, like a lower quality option. And I think where I'm coming in is that like there's this idea that in all of these reasons that people stay alive, there is a value in that reason, be it your loved ones, be it connection, or even this idea of control and autonomy. A lot of people think that the only way for me to exert autonomy over my life is to die. But the problem with that is that once you do it, you can never exert your autonomy again. Yeah. And once we get that kernel, that value out there, we can find better ways to solve the problems. We can find better ways to bring them in these directions instead of doing something once and you can never do them again. Because I like to say that suicide is not a value. Suicide, nobody says, I value suicide. Because it's not a value. Values are something like a road that we go on. But for suicide, you can call it like a goal, you can call it an achievement, whatever it is, you do it once and that's it. You can't do anything ever again.
Got it. Good distinction.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I feel
yes, it does. It does. Should we just go over that again, though? Because I think we're all a little bit well versed in goals and values. Maybe you could you just like spell it out for people that maybe haven't come across those two concepts?
Totally. Yeah. So the idea of values, right, is you can imagine it. There's a difference between goals and values. Values are like directions. They're like north, south, east, and west. But we don't say, oh, I finally went north. I finally achieved north. And in the same way, we can say, oh, I'm finally a good person. I'm finally creative now, for example. In the same way that goals are like milestones along the way that maybe point us towards the right the direction that we want to go in. But because we often confuse goals and values, we often confuse a goal for a value. And because values are like directions, suicide is not a value because it's only something that you can do once and you can't do it ever again. Yeah.
And if suicide, let's just say, was a goal that lay upon the direction of your given value, let's say, I don't know, finding peace or something, and
peace or like freedom
we'd bring that, we'd put that on the table and discuss the usefulness and effectiveness of that, because although it is, as we've said before, one solution, are there not other better ones you could perhaps use instead, and you'd still be on your virtuous pathway, essentially?
Definitely. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's later on. It's later on in the book. It's in the chapter on like managing passive suicidality, but it's something like, let's say, like in the case of passive suicidality, and we have identified that their value is control. I want to have control over my life, and for now, the only way that I think can achieve that is to die, and this is their current thought process. But in the sense that, let's say when you leave the control and autonomy to a passing truck or, like nature, whichever, in that way, you're not exerting control over your life. So what are some ways that you can currently exert control and autonomy that do not involve something that once you do it, you can never do it again? That's the kind of question that we should be asking.
It's clever.
People.
It's a clever workaround.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's a strengths-based questions. It's an idea of like what road do I go on instead of how do I prevent people from completely accessing this one road.
Yeah, so it's funny you should say that, because I was thinking strengths-based the whole time you were speaking. This idea that I really want to live in line with this value, but the way I'm feeling means the only way I see that as possible is to do X, Y, and Z. And what you're doing, Ron, is coming in and saying, hold on a second. Maybe that's one way, but there's other ways in which we can get feeling control of other things as well. Like we can take charge of our hobbies, interests, careers, relationships. Other ways in which we can direct, find direction.
I mean, I think it's on I think it's in the first or second page of my book where I was like,
Ron, have you got a book?
You haven't mentioned that. No,
it's in the works, right? Yeah. But I think the start of that chapter was like, I wrote about this incident where I was like literally like hanging above a railing, just like dangling my legs, over like many stories of like air. And part of the reason why I got down from the railing was because I was telling myself, I didn't want like a strong breeze, because I was hoping for a breeze to like kind of push me off. I didn't want a strong breeze to be the cause of my death.
Wow.
And if in time to come, I want to do it, then I will do it myself. But in the meantime, I didn't want that, to be like, I was imagining my obituary, it's like killed by a strong gust of wind. It's like, that's not the way that I want my life to end. And, that led me to a discussion of like, okay, what are some other ways that I can exert control and autonomy over my life?
So what if then, say someone does find a value, let's call it freedom or autonomy, whatever. We agree that by committing suicide, you have ultimately inhibited and prevented your journey on that particular value and that pursuit. Do they still suffer then on their journey to freedom? Do they still carry that felt sense with them? And how are they supposed to cope with that?
I think you hit the nail on the head, where it's this idea that like, if I was actually talking to a suicidal person, I would like use different word choices, but the idea that suffering is inevitable. And the true freedom comes not in avoiding suffering, but in choosing what type of suffering we want to have. And let's say if I was really in session, I would, be going through like this and like this option versus that option. But it's a really kind of tough idea to entertain that this suffering that you're feeling, you may be feeling it like forever, but in different capacities. But at the end of the day, what I still believe is that no matter your life circumstance, there is always a option. And this option, sometimes it may not even be in what to do, but how to assign meaning to what has happened, to the events of your past.
I think that's really empowering, Ron. And firstly, I really want to thank you for your example that you shared as well, because that was so lovely to hear that. And I felt a real sort of shiver going down my spine when you said, I want to do this. If I'm doing this, this is on my terms. So thank you for sharing. But I can definitely agree and relate to the idea that the type of suffering can be chosen. And when I think about this on a different level, I think, okay, I could have just carried on in my old job, slaving away, feeling very, very unhappy. Or I could take the risk and open up my own private practice, just me. And that comes with other stresses. Now I've got to worry about, will I have enough clients? Will I get my admin done? Do I get enough money to pay the mortgage? Before I didn't have that worry because I had my salary. I knew what it was. The clients were provided by the service, right? Now I have different pains and different challenges, but they are of my choosing, and they are more in line with my values and how I want to live.
Definitely. And I really like how, because like the topic is about like suicidality, right? But then we eventually transition to all these other parts of like suffering and life. And I think that idea of suicidality is one part of a bigger umbrella, and we are naturally like going from like one conversation to the next, not just talking about suicidality. I think that's the kind of key thing that we should take away. And even in writing my book, I was like, I wanted to write a manual on not just like stopping or preventing suicidality, but a manual on how to live life while also accepting the presence of suicide as one possible but low quality option.
Yeah. This is something that I've been trying to think about how I weave in since you mentioned it, probably about half an hour ago. And it's been really, I've been wanting to say, but I've been working on, I think this is the area. I think I'm going to bring it in here. And my dog is kicking the door. So sorry if you can hear the dog kicking the door, trying to get in. Brené Brown does a lot of work with shame and guilt. And earlier you talked a lot about the shame and guilt associated with suicide and death and that kind of thing. And I just think this idea of suicide being one option, it's something we could talk about. We could, sorry, bear with me.
Let him in.
Yeah. Put him on your lap. Oh, no.
Kicking my door in. I've lost my train of thought. This idea that things are only shameful when they're unspoken and suppressed. Right. And this idea that, I am unhappy in these areas, I am feeling this pain. One way out would be suicide is I think, we're really healthy to talk about that, put it on the table and take that shame and guilt, or try and reduce that shame and guilt where we can. Sorry, I lost my train of thought a bit there because the dogs were annoying me so much.
I think I read something about it. It was like shame lives, or shame thrives when it's not like brought into light. And there's something about like when it's darkness, and when you bring light to the darkness by speaking about it, it naturally kind of reduces and weakens.
Yes. Because I suppose probably everyone is going to experience suicidal thoughts at some point in their life. I mean, maybe a bit of a generalization, but I think a lot of people do, probably more than what we ever speak about. And that could lead back into those models you were discussing, Ron, about being, sorry, my brain isn't working there today, but a loneliness, like a sense of being separate, belonging, not belonging.
Belonging and burdensomeness.
Burdensomeness, it could sort of speak to those things.
But this is on a spectrum, isn't it? This changes all the time. I can certainly think of times in my life where I've thought, oh my gosh, maybe I've disconnected from my wise self for a moment. I'm thinking, how on earth am I going to get that done by then? And one option is just to not have to worry about any of this by not being here. And that idea that everyone could have that if there was that button, we could press it, which would be horrifying for me. Because if I think, oh my gosh, during my teenage years, I could have pressed that button so many times. And, look, I wouldn't have had this. I wouldn't have had my annoying dogs. I wouldn't have had my family. I wouldn't have had my house, this career, all those things.
This podcast, I imagine you meant to say
this podcast.
So, yeah. In no particular order, but yes.
Yeah.
So thank goodness we don't have that acquired capability, I think.
Yeah,
and for sure.
I think you just kickstarted one like neuron in my brain that was like just begging to like to activate, and it's this idea of like why it is kind of like a addition to uh, Tom's question earlier on what separates passive into active, and like the answer is that it's a build up, right? And this build up is this idea of like, oh, whenever I have a problem, the first thing that comes to my mind is that I should kill myself. And when this kind of like thought process like replaces the healthy problem solving like approach, it's like almost every solution, every problem that you meet, the answer is suicide, 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 suicide. Because the idea that there's with this like one action, you can all the pain is removed. Like it's a very tempting proposition, and eventually like suicide crowds out all other forms of problem solving, and that's why even thinking about suicide gives you what we call positive reinforcers. This idea of peace or finality or euphoria, or sometimes when you tell people about it, they rush to like give you care and attention. That is also a form of positive reinforcer. And eventually what happens is that all your forms of like healthy or effective problem solving gets crowded out by suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts. Yeah.
Well, I've got I have a question, if that's okay, and it's just popped into my head, and it's probably ill-formed and premature. But thinking about this from a therapist standpoint, where do we draw the line between passive and active? Because I've worked with clients before who are reassuring me, please, this is not something that's on my immediate agenda, and yet they have access to means. Maybe they've bought a lot of paracetamol, or maybe they have rope, or they have a certain area they've found, and as a therapist, you're trying to work this out. You're trying to think, okay, how much of this is where I need to act and involve others, and how much of this is I need to sit with it? Where would you start to think about I need to kick into action?
It's an incredible question. And the first thing that popped into my mind, which may not be very satisfactory, is intuition. But within that intuition, there's kind of rational elements to it. Because someone may, and the book gives, Thomas Johannes' book gives quite a few examples. Someone may express to you that, oh, I have intentions and I have the means. But he writes about an incident where even though somebody expressed that to him, he still didn't, do anything. He didn't institutionalize the person because he felt that institutionalization would have made it worse.
Absolutely.
And this is a case, that was a case of a lady who had access to means and intention, and sometimes like I think even a plan, but she had people that were relying on her children, that at home. So if she was institutionalized, she would have lost access to what was keeping her alive.
Yeah.
And basically, like it's those three reasons and factors: that burdensomeness, that the competence, the belongingness, and then finally that acquired capability, of which is usually measured in previous suicide attempts. And so I think we get better as clinicians, like at judging later on, but the intuition is kind of based off of these prior factors. That being said, it brings to mind one incident where my supervisor was actually telling me where she wasn't sure about whether a client who did express some ideation to her, but she kind of like went dark in a way. So she was very worried. And so what she did was that this was in Australia, and they have this service, like a welfare service, to just check on people. And so even though she wasn't sure, she just dropped a note to that service to check up on her client who had like gone dark. And even though there was thankfully no suicidal crisis, no active suicidal crisis, the client got back to her and said that, this was the time where like I've never felt so cared for in my life. I've never felt so seen in my life. Because most of the time, like, people don't even care about me. And so, like, intuition goes both ways, I think is the point that I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, definitely does. And sometimes as a therapist, you're getting advice to say, oh no, let's say we get some safeguarding advice and we've got a client who's also reporting some suicidal ideation, but they're saying, oh no, the only thing that's keeping me safe is my ability to, be a mum or be a dad or whatever. And then there's some safeguarding advice, which means, well, maybe they're using substances to cope with their mood sometimes. And then safeguarding is saying, oh, we need to report this to social services. At which point then you're thinking, that's a huge escalating factor for that person's risk. And you have to make the choice, don't you? You have to make the decision and, think, okay, if we do this, is this person going to be safe or not? And seeking support. Yeah. And how much risk? We sit with a lot of uncertainty as therapists, don't we? We really do. I mean, I can think of clients I have now who, I feel comfortable with because we've discussed it, but at the same time, things could change, and it's something we check in with every single session. But it's something's flagging up for me here because my wife would laugh at this if she listens. I got a voicemail yesterday, and it was literally, "Hi, call me back urgently." And I'm thinking, my mind goes to, oh my gosh, something terrible's happened to one of my clients. So, oh my gosh, what's happened? Turns out it was a scam call. They just wanted to tell me that my SEO on my website wasn't good enough and it needed urgent attention. But, that's the thing we're thinking is, I'm comfortable and we sit with it, but we kind of need to trust each other. And I'll often say to my clients, look, I am not going to take this further. I'm not going to necessarily speak to a GP about this. I'm not going to report this to whoever, but can we make a kind of a pact here where, things do change? We do talk about it first. Would that be possible? And I don't want to put that kind of pressure on them. I understand if they can't, but at the same time, just kind of putting it out there and seeing what the response is quite reassuring for me.
It's nice, Tom, to, I think, be human with them because, again, I just reflect on my own career, but it's often been the case that when someone presents with suicidal ideation, you have to tick 10 boxes. And that is for the client, but it's also for you as a therapist. And sometimes that is probably not really what the client needs. They probably needed, I don't know, to feel heard a bit more or to feel trusted with you, Tom, that they can speak to you and you're open and that it's safe. And I wonder if that's in many ways a lot more powerful. I'm not saying we shouldn't do the other stuff because I don't know quite what the correct thing to do is, but I think reintroducing and reigniting that human element. I know that's what would work for me. Let's put it that way.
100%. And I think like one of the big inspirations for me when writing my book was this one. It's called the Assessment and Clinical Manual. I just call it a clinical manual. It's by the APA for suicidal patients. And you would expect the APA to be very like check a box. And it's symptom A, B, C, D, E, and G of disorder, like 1, 2, and 3. But in essence, this was one of the things that I'm talking about is there's a difference between what they call the prevention-oriented approach, and which is the current focus of the current suicide prevention models, in the sense that immediately when someone talks about like, oh, I have suicidal ideation, they go to this like checklist of like, oh, what do you want to do? Like, how do you plan on doing it? What are some of the darkest thoughts that you have? When do you want to do it? And it's this understandable reaction, but the counterpoint to that is this idea of a acceptance-oriented approach or a treatment-oriented approach that asks those questions anyway, but then immediately transitions to a more, strengths-based, a more beneficial, a more problem-solving orientation, where a big part of that is accepting that in some ways we cannot predict suicide. We cannot stop suicide. And sometimes it just happens despite the best care, in the way that maybe, let's say, a cancer patient receiving the best care at a hospital may still have a chance of passing away. That's a risk that we have to accept as clinicians. Yeah. And sorry.
No, you're completely right. I mean, there's that point, isn't there, of where have I done everything I can while still thinking about my person and their needs, and I remember so many conversations with trainee therapists when I was on duty in the NHS saying, look, Tom, I just need you to tell me that I've done everything I can before I go home. I was like, no, we need you to harden your hands within this uncertainty. We need you to, believe that you've assessed this individual client, you've looked at their idiosyncratic need, and you're thinking about preserving the therapeutic relationship, but also not being neglectful of what needs to happen. And now you need to go and enjoy your weekend. And it's the idea that if something happens over that weekend, okay, and that's really, really sad. But it is, and it always perhaps was, and that's okay.
Yeah. Agree.
I think I did read something about a statistic that escapes my mind about the percentage of clinicians who have had a patient die by suicide on their watch, and that number was actually like very high, like surprisingly high. Yeah, I don't remember the exact one, but I think that was an eye-opening kind of moment for me. Yeah, accepting that the only thing that we can do is our best. And
Yes, that's right. That's right.
I often reflect on the Samaritan's approach to suicide. In that, I remember I did some training with the Samaritans before I became a therapist, and they would say if they had someone on the phone who said they've cut themselves and they're dying, or that they've taken an overdose and they're dying, then they stay with that person. They don't call an ambulance. They stay with that person until that person loses what they consider to be capacity. And as soon as that capacity is gone, i.e. someone has lost consciousness or something like that, then they will call the ambulance, which I thought was, a very difficult and humane way of approaching someone else's needs. But yeah, very, very difficult thing.
I'm inclined to say, I can't say whether it's right or wrong, but I just think if it was me in that position, I'd really just want a human being. Like if I was having therapy, going through some suicidal ideation, more important than the GP letter and the risk management plan and this and that, I would just love to be able to pick up my problems and go to a therapist for an hour and just like not feel judged for it. That would mean, I think, so much more to me, that human element of it all. So it's I get it's a bit controversial, and it's certainly not how we're trained, is it, Tom, to sort of deal with it like that? But I can see it. I can see that could be very useful to that individual for sure.
Yeah. Look, I'm very, very conscious of the time, gentlemen. So I was thinking about bringing this to a close in a moment, but Ron, just with regards to the management of this, then it sounds like a strength-based values approach can be very, very helpful. Also, this naming of this and bringing the conversation to the table in order to try and reduce some of the shame and guilt around that. Is there anything else though that you'd recommend as managing, or are they the main things?
Yeah. So the first part is I guess I'll elaborate on I think especially the first part, the strengths-based part, in the sense that part of the management efforts is to really recognize what strengths can look like different things, in the sense that, let's say somebody comes to you with a very extensive suicide plan, for example, that in itself shows that they are able to dedicate their effort to something, even if it's, in this case, it's about a suicide. And the other thing that's also important to ask is really like, in this room, you're talking to me about suicide, right? But why haven't you done it yet? And I believe there's a quote by another famous clinician that again has escaped my mind. Where it's like, in therapy, the part of you that I want to talk to is the part that's in here in the therapy room right now, not the part that's wanting or seeking death, but why are you here now instead of somewhere else? And when you ask and you talk to that part, eventually that you come across the reason for why they're living, and it's a value. It's usually a value, and from there we can go with the problem solving approach from there.
Brilliant. Can I just put some bullet points out there, because we've done so much good stuff today. So we've kind of got difference between passive and active suicidality. We've also got the model, so the perceived burdensomeness, the not belonging, and the ability to carry out those actions. Capability. We've also got the need for understanding the person's value, and that suicide is kind of a flawed problem-solving goal along that particular path, and with exploration you can find a better way. We've also learned that you also don't get to not suffer. You get to pick your poison. You're going to suffer. Life has always got suffering. You get to choose which way. And as you said, Tom, sorry, am I?
Yeah. So I just want to make a clarification on that, because I think when people hear that, they often think, oh, I have to suffer, and they go on this kind of like masochistic path. The way I modify that is saying that some suffering has meaning, others does not.
So it's got meaning. That's
Yeah.
I missed that part.
But one thing that is that definitely has meaning, because sometimes we suffer for no reason, but one thing that definitely has meaning is actually the reduction of suffering in ourselves and others. Being able to do that is guaranteed definite. That's also meaning compared to suffering, which may or may not have.
Understood.
But if I'm in charge of that, if I'm in control of it, then it's like Tom just said, pick your poison, which I think could be the episode name, right? It's this idea that I'm choosing. I choose to work hard for my own business. I choose to work hard for my family. I choose to do these things for that, and that feels still like suffering, but something I'm willing to do because it is, like you say, it's reduced. It's my preferred way.
Yeah.
So I'm in control of that.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think, let's say if we have a question of like, like what does happiness look like? I think I've answered it before. It's like having the problems that I want to have, and not the problems that I don't want to have.
Absolutely.
That's it. Yeah, so it's finding the meaning in. We're going to suffer, but you have to find the meaning in your suffering, and obviously the reduction of suffering can be as a result of that.
Definitely, and not like dropping all my problems and like reducing like 100%.
Ron, can you say that again? Happiness is having the problems that I want to have. Is that what you said?
Yeah. I think you got it. Like.
Okay. Just writing that down. No reason.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I think that naturally brings us to an end. So I just want to say a huge thank you, Ron, for coming back and for sharing your expertise in this area. For those who are interested in what you've said and want to find you, where can they find you, Ron? Where would they be able to get to you?
You can find me on Instagram, like what Tom said. It is a mental health CEO. Yeah, and that's where mostly I hang out. And I just want to give a quick shout out for my book.
Absolutely, I was going to come on to that now. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's called Passive Suicidality. What to do when you don't want to live but you cannot die.
Okay.
So yeah, it's going to be out in Amazon in a couple of days, 2 to 3 days. So if you're interested in this topic, the points related to you in this episode, feel free to check that out. That will be on Amazon.
Fantastic. And we will put the show notes out, but as soon as that book comes out, we will also get the link and edit the show notes and put that in so anybody can find that directly as well. And congratulations on the book, Ron. I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Thank you so
much. Maybe get a signed copy.
Well, these didn't come signed, Ron. I was pretty annoyed about that. But
the nod for resale is my signature. So.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I know it's a really challenging topic. Just to recap, if anybody is finding anything we've talked about difficult, then please do think about what you need. What is that? Is it speaking to people? Is it maybe making a doctor's appointment or going back to that therapist that opened up that conversation at some point? Think about what you need. And you can always reach out to us if you want to. Drop us a message on Instagram. We might not be able to reply immediately, but it's always something we can point you in the right direction if needed. Great. Well, look, we've done really badly at sticking to our hour, but what an excellent discussion. Thank you, Ron. And for now, we'll say goodbye and see you in 2 weeks. So, Tom, would you like to say goodbye?
Yeah, and also just to Ron as well, it really is a great book, and you really have been incredibly candid, which people will see when they read that. So, yeah, well done. It's a real achievement, and thank you for being vulnerable.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's me. I'm done. Oh, can I just say one last thing? This was a behavioural experiment for Tom and I, because usually we're very, very well prepared for these podcasts, and we just didn't. I don't know why, we just didn't quite find the time. But it's gone all right. It's felt for me really natural, really organic, really flowy, and I feel like we could talk for another hour. So I think that's always a good sign. So yeah, just reflecting on that. That's it. That's literally me done now. That's literally what I'm going to say.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.